Hello and welcome to We Learn. This is session 11 of Labor Law, Minimum Wages Act 1948. Topics to be covered: Introduction, Minimum Wages and ILO, Fixation of Minimum Wages in India, Minimum Wages Act 1948, the objectives, scope and coverage of the Act, definition, fixing and revising of the minimum wages, minimum rate of wages advisory board, payment of minimum rates of wages, fixing the floors of a normal working days, rates of overtiming, enforcement of the act, authorities of hearing and deciding claims, power of government, and general remarks. Introduction. Yes, in this session we will going to discuss about the Minimum Wages Act or 1948, which was actually giving the ideas about the minimum wages provided to the workers of the industry. So yes, the philosophy of a labor law, including the Minimum Wages Act, is that industry is for the men, not meant for the industry. It is basically that बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट या जिस पर्पस पे ये फ़िलासफ़ी बनी है वो फ़िलासफ़ी ये है कि इंडस्ट्रीज इज़ क्रिएटेड फॉर अ वेल बीइंग फॉर अ मैन, not a man made for an industry. So work in the industry should be integrated part of happiness, and employers are under an obligation, call it economical and sociologies, to provide these employees safe, healthy and comfortable living, employment and working condition. The employers mainly conducting and bringing out that kind of an obligation that this is all about to provide the employees सेफ्टीज. एक इंडस्ट्री जो है ये उसकी रेगुलेशन है कि वो एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में सेफ्टी प्रोवाइड करे, हेल्थ प्रोवाइड करे, कंफर्ट प्रोवाइड करे अपने लेबर्स को, एंड येस एट द सेम टाइम ब्रिंगिंग आउट द गुड वर्किंग कंडीशंस एंड द वेजेस फॉर द एम्प्लॉयज़. So the basic concept of a minimum wages is based on the principle of the equity and social justice. So the basic and the main concept is about the equity and social justice, and the underlying the idea is that he who work is entitled to fair the remunerations which may enable him to live a life constant with the human dignity. In terms of this is what to generate and to bringing out the good remunerations in the society which actually provide the dignity to the persons. Now, what is minimum wages and ILO? The need for the regulating minimum wages has been gaining increasing attention not only for the government of developing and developed country but also the ILO's organization. In terms of, we can say that the ILO, which is the international level organization, they were actually prepared the standards of the wages after the First World War, and they were bringing out all these standards, all these rules and regulations through which the wages of the workers is going to be given and decided. The ILO basically is the important one to fix the minimum wages. Now, fixation of the minimum wages in India. India has ratified the ILO conventions on the minimum wages fixing machineries and has entitled a central minimum wages as known as the Minimum Wages Act. It is what India is actually ratified the ILO convention. जो भी ILO ने conventions दी हैं, जो भी ILO ने concepts दिए हैं, India was actually agreeing on it, and yes, entitled all the minimum wages legislation which is provided by ILO, and this is the Minimum Wages Act 1948 in India. Yes, in 1929, the Royal Commission of a Labour recommended a policy of a gradual introduction of a statutory minimum wages. In terms of that, in the Royal Commissions, this is what the first initial introduction stage of the statutory minimum wages, जहाँ पर हमारी statutory minimum wages को discuss किया गया था. In 1938, the Central Legislative Assembly adopted a resolution urging the payment of sufficient wages and the fair treatment for the workers in the industry and protect and subsidized by the government. So in that case, after that, the Central Legislative Assembly was basically looking for कि किस तरीके से wages, sufficient wages provide की जाए, और yes, at the same time fair treatment employees को दिया जाए. Minimum Wages Act 1948 में yes, the main objective of this particular act is to promote the welfare of workers. वर्कर्स के वेलफेयर्स को देखना, वर्कर्स की सैलरीज को देखना. दैट इज़ व्हाई इट इज़ रिटर्न दैट इट इज़ promote the welfares of the worker by fixing the minimum rate of wages in the certain industry where the labor is not organized and sweeter the labor is not prevalent. In terms of it is what in term to promote your employees who while going to decide the मिनिमम रेट्स, आप वो वेजेस रेट डिसाइड करेंगे जो उनकी लेबर्स को सही सूट बैठते हैं, एंड इट एक्चुअली प्रोवाइड द वेलफेयर टू देम. The Act basically seeks to prevent the exploitations of the worker by ensuring that they are paid the minimum wages which would provide their substance and preserve their efficiency. In terms of this is what to bringing out or to preventing all the जितनी भी exploitations एक employees के लिए होती हैं वो सारी exploitations को minimum करना, and yes at the same time bringing out the benefits for the workers of the organization, provide them the good wages. Now, what is the scope and coverage of the Act? The Act basically applies to the whole of India. Initially, it is applied to the agriculture, employment, and another 12 areas. But yes, this is basically appropriated in the overall India right now. So, the appropriate government is empowered to extend this Act to an other employment in respect to which it is option that the minimum rate of the wages should be fixed under the Act. So this is empowered the Act in terms of that other employment in respect of which it is of the opinion. So it could be decide the wages. State government have used this power to bringing within the previews of the Act, not a view of few others employment, which is result then now to be act upon more than the 300 employees. In terms of वो organization जिसके पास अब 300 तक के employments हैं, that organization is going to conduct, or that organization is actually going to follow the Minimum Wages Act. Now, definition of the appropriate government. As we discussed, yes, the organizations always have an approval of the appropriate government. Now, what exactly the appropriate government is? Appropriate government is a relation to any scheduled employment carried on by or under the authority of the central government, of the rail administrations, or in the relation to the mine, oil field, or major ports, or any corporation established by the central act, means the central government. In terms of वो regulated policy, वो regulated area who were actually following or relating to the any scheduled employment अंडर दी अथॉरिटी ऑफ अ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, जो किसी भी तरीके की सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट की अथॉरिटी में आते हैं, किसी भी रेलवे अथॉरिटीज़ में आते हैं, माइंस में, ऑयल फील्ड में, मेजर पोर्ट्स के अंदर, उन सबको ये एक्ट फॉलो करना है. एंड येस एट द सेम टाइम किसी भी तरीके की एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेट करते वक्त दे हैव टू कंसीडर दिस एक्ट. सो द शेड्यूल of section 2G and the section 27 schedule, as we were discussing about this, yes, every law has a certain kind of a schedule and the detailed information, or we can say that the listed information would be there. So in that case, schedule is prepared. Schedule part 1 is what employment in the any woolen carpet marketing and shawl wearing establishment, it's going to be conducted this act. Employment on the any राइस मील, फोर मील, दाल मील्स, दैट ऑल कम्स इनटू दी शेड्यूल 1 पार्ट. ये सारी वो इंडस्ट्रीज़ हैं जो कि शेड्यूल 1 में लिखी गई हैं, जिनका मिनिमम वेजेस एक्ट फॉलो करना बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. अदर इज एम्प्लॉयमेंट इन दी एनी टोबैको मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, employment in the any plantation, that is to say the any state which was there. In terms of this is employment of the any plantation. Part 2 schedule के अंदर employment in the agriculture, that is to say in any form of farming, include the cultivation and the tillage of the soil, dairy farming and productions, cultivations, growing, harvesting of any agriculture and historical commodity, raising of livestock, bees, poultry, and any practices performed by the farmer or the farm incidents, it is what comes into the शेड्यूल 1, किसी भी तरीके की एम्प्लॉयमेंट एग्रीकल्चर में, कल्टीवेशन में, सॉइल्स में, डेयरी फार्मिंग में, प्रोडक्शंस में, ग्रोइंग हार्वेस्टिंग के केस में, इट और इन द राइजिंग ऑफ द लाइफ स्टॉक्स, बी एंड पोर्टल, दे ऑल practices was going to be convicted with that particular act. Another is employment and cleaning and sorting of the opinion and other incidental work. Another is employee. एम्प्लॉय कौन हो सकते हैं? एम्प्लॉय मीन्स एनी पर्सन हु इज एम्प्लॉयड और हायर or reward to do any work, skilled and unskilled, manual and clinical, in the scheduled employment, and yes, in the respect of the minimum rates of the wages. So employees वो होते हैं जिन्हें हायर किया जाता है, जिनकी स्किल्स को या जो कि या तो उनको हायर किया जाएगा उनकी स्किल बेसिस पर या अनस्किल्ड बेसिस पर, बट येस एट द सेम टाइम दैट पर्सन मस्ट हैव अ minimum wages of providing their services. That is what the employee, and that is what the reward. Then wages means all the remuneration capable of being expressed in terms of money. मनी के टर्म्स में जितनी भी रेम्यूनरेशंस होते हैं जो एक एम्प्लॉय को मिलते हैं वो सब जो है वो वेजेस होते हैं. It could be as it's written that it is the minimum of the wages work, so fixed may be reviewed at such interval. So another is fixation and reviewing of the minimum wages. It is what the minimum rate of the wages may be fixed by the hour, by the day, or by the week, and by the month. In terms of minimum wages could be decided upon. जो मिनिमम वेजेस हैं वो आपके या तो किसी भी तरीके के वीक के बेसिस पर हो सकते हैं, आर के बेसिस पर हो सकते हैं, डे बेसिस पर, मंथ बेसिस पर हो सकते हैं. In fixing or reviewing the minimum rate of the wages, differentiations may be fixed off. In terms of जितने भी एक resources while deciding your cost would be there, so उनकी exact pricing लगनी ज़रूरी है. And then finally is the what are the rates of the wages? Different rate may be fixed off. That means just to bringing out the different areas rate. So the first one is the different scheduled corporation. Another is different different classes of a work in the same schedule: adult, adolescents, child, and apprentice, and different facilities. In this, basically, the discussion is all about the act is basically consisting about the how deciding the minimum act, a basic rate of a wage and a special allowances at the rate to be adjusted to the variations in the cost of the living index, application applicable to such worker at a such interval and in a such manner as the government may be direct. In terms of this is basically discussing about that what kind of a cost of living we were actually getting. एक पर्टिकुलर कंट्री के अंदर किस लेवल की कॉस्ट ऑफ लिविंग रिक्वायर्ड होती है, एंड यस एट द सेम टाइम बेसिक रेट ऑफ द वेजेस विद और विदाउट द कॉस्ट ऑफ अ लिविंग अलाउंसेस एंड द कैश वैल्यू ऑफ द कंसेशंस इन रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ द सप्लायर्स ऑफ द एसेंशियल कमोडिटी एट द कंसेशंस रेट were so authorized in terms of that what kind of the cash value was taken into the consideration, and all the exclusive rate allowing to the basic rate, the cost of living allowances and the cash value of the concessions if any. अगर इनमें किसी तरह की concessions हैं, so these concessions are also provided. So this is basically how we bring out the concepts. Now next is the advisory board. Advisory board is basically comes into the two part. Advisory board is all about discussing that they were here for giving the advice on how we're going to decide the minimum wages. So advisory board are of consist of two, the compositions of committees and advisory board, which is comes all the rules and the regulations was comes into the section 9, and there is the central advisory board which is on the section 8. Payment of the minimum rate of wages. Payment of the minimum rate is where in the respect of the any scheduled employed minimum wages has been fixed. The employer is basically wage at the rate not less than the minimum rate of the wages fixed for that classes of the employees in the employment. Payment is what of the kind of defining upon the what is the minimum and a fixed area. So employer shall pay every employee wage rate not less than minimum, जितने भी minimum wage rate decide किया जाता है उससे कम कभी भी नहीं पे किया जाएगा. Such wages shall be paid without any deductions. उन्हीं wages में किसी तरीके की deductions नहीं होंगी. And yes, where the contract rate of the wages is higher, the statutory obligation does not comes into the play. And yes, the फिक्सिंग आवर फॉर अ नॉर्मल वर्किंग डे. एक नॉर्मल वर्किंग डे में किस तरीके से आवर्स को फिक्सअप किया जाता है. सो वेयर द मिनिमम रेट ऑफ अ वेजेस हैज बीन फिक्स्ड इन रिगार्ड ऑफ द एनी शेड्यूल्ड एम्प्लॉयमेंट, द एप्रोप्रिएट गवर्नमेंट सेज दैट fix the number of working hours which constitute a normal working day inclusive of one or a more specific interval. That means एक normal working day के अंदर, एक पूरे day के अंदर whichever you think it's the required number of the hours was appropriate, fix them, but yes, at the same time they must have a specific interval, time gap between the hours. Second thing is to be considered is provide for a day of an rest in the every period of the 7 days and the payment of the remuneration in respect of the such of a day. In terms of if it is if you want to give in a rest, so 7th day of an working day would be the rest day. In terms of आपकी जिस भी टाइम पर वर्किंग शुरू होती है उसका जो 7th डे होता है, जैसे वी कैन टेक द वीक मंडे ट्यूसडे थर्सडे फ्राइडे सैटरडे एंड संडे इज द 7th डे, तो इट इज अ हॉलीडे. प्रोवाइडिंग फॉर द पेमेंट ऑफ worker on a day of an rest at the rate not less than overtimes. In terms of it is if it is providing them the payment of the workers, so it would not less than the overtime rate. Another is in relation to the following classes of the employees. The above provision shall apply in such extent and subject to such condition as may be prescribed. सबसे पहले कौन सी conditions इसके अंदर या कौन सी provisions इसके अंदर consider की जाती हैं. Employees engaged in the urgent work or in any emergencies which could not be foreseen and prevented. In terms of this is what the employment is understanding that कि यस किस तरीके का अगर कोई बहुत ही अर्जेंट वर्क है तो उस केस में आप कैसे टाइम्स को मैनेज करेंगे. Employees engaged in the nature of the proprietary or the complementary work which may necessarily be carried on outside the limited length to do the general working in the employment concern. So this is what employees are basically engaged in the nature of proprietary, and employees whose employed in the essential intermediaries would be considered there. And yes, employees engaged in the any work which technically reason, अगर उसमें कोई technical reasons हैं या कोई duties हैं, so उसके हिसाब से and then employees engaged in any work which could not be carried on the expected of time dependency, तो in that case irregular function जिसमें आपका time fix होना बहुत ज़रूरी है, उस केस में आप time check करेंगे कितना time तक का होगा. Now what is the rate of overview? एक ओवरव्यू का क्या रेट होना चाहिए. इफ यू कंसीडर द रेट ऑफ एन ओवरव्यू, इट कुड बी लाइक वेजेस ऑफ द वर्कमैन हु वर्क फॉर लेस देन नॉर्मल वर्किंग डे, तो उसके हिसाब से उसे रेट मिलेगा. देन वेजेस फॉर टू और मोर क्लासेस ऑफ द वर्कर. मिनिमम टाइम रेट वेजेस फॉर द पीस वीक रजिस्टर एंड रिकॉर्ड्स. Enforcement of the act. Enforcement of the act is what bringing the act into the correct form. वो enforcement of the act होता है. Inspectors in terms of the inspection is going on, so it could be done by the officers gazetted of the appointed or the appropriate government, and yes, official gazetteer is appointed by them, and it is defined the local limit within which they shall exercise their functions. So the inspectors have to see that the provisions of the act are complied with or not. Then for this inspections, inspectors are empowered too. किस तरीके की empowerment है हमारे इंस्पेक्टर के पास. Enter at all the reasonable hours with such assistance that they may think fit any premises or the place where the employees are employed in respect of which the minimum rate of wages have been fixed for the purpose of examining and register records of the wages, notice required to keep or exhibit by or under this act, or rules made there under and required the production thereof for the inspections. In terms of this is what to bringing out एक reasonable hours जब आप निकालते हो, so कौन कौन सी चीज़ें जो है इंस्पेक्टर को देखनी होती. hours, assistance, premises, wages, minimum rate of wages, examining of registers and records and notices, and yes, these kind of things would be considered by the inspector. examine any person whom he find in any of the such premises place and reasonable causes to believe in the employees in terms of कि किसी भी person से वो discussions कर सकते हैं, किसी भी तरीके person से वो एक बात कर सकते हैं. It is another is required any person giving overload or any outer worker to give any information which is in his power to give with respect to other person and for the whom the work is giving or received, and with respect to the payment to be made for the workers. In terms of this is all about bringing the persons giving the outwork in terms of those workers who were actually performing in the organization and they were actually respecting and working in the organization. That comes into this part. Exercise such other powers as may be prescribed. In terms of you have to consider other powers also. Claims is what the kind of, it is the appointed government may notified in the official gazette appointed an authority to hear and decide of any specific area and all claim. In terms of official gazette was going to decide and discuss about the claims. Claims could be arising out of the payment of a less than minimum rate of a wages or for the work done of a day of rest. It is what the kind of a payment of the less than the minimum wage. तो उस केस में claim हो सकता है in respect of the wages at the overtime rate. अगर आपको overtime rate paid है या non paid है, so that comes उस पर आप claim कर सकते हो. Then the authority for hearing and deciding the claims. किस तरीके से authorities को consider किया जाएगा, सुना जाएगा. Authority of the appointment may be, it could be कोई भी commissioner हो सकता है workman compensation का. It could be any officer of the central government exercising the function as a labor commissioners. It could be any officer of state government ranking the labor commissioner. It could be any of the other officers with experience, the judge of a civil court. Who may apply? Yes, wherein an employee have any claim. एक एम्प्लॉय को किसी भी तरीके का क्लेम है तो उस केस में वो जो है केस कर सकता है या क्लेम कर सकता है. सो इन दैट केस अथॉरिटी फॉर हेयरिंग एंड डिसाइडिंग द केस द एम्प्लॉय हिमसेल्फ, द लीगल प्रैक्टिशनरी, any official or registrar, trade union authorized in writing of the act, any inspector, any person acting with the permissions of the authority. So किस केस में आप डिसाइड कर सकते हो कि who will going to hear and deciding the case. कौन कर सकता है? एम्प्लॉय खुद कर सकता है अपने केस को रिप्रेजेंट. लीगल प्रैक्टिशनर की ज़रूरत हो सकती है, कोई भी ऑफिशियल ट्रेड यूनियन मेंबर हो सकता है, कोई भी इंस्पेक्टर हो सकता है और कोई भी person acting as a permission of authority. Now, authority of compensation. Authority of compensation is what when an application is entertained, the authority shall hear the applicant and the employers, gives them an opportunity to hear. In terms of in the amount of compensation, जब एक application applied होती है तो in that case it would be heard by the applicant. वो applicant की बात सुनी जाती है और employers की बात भी सुनी जाती है. And yes, this is a kind of an opportunity that your concept is actually going to be heard. After listening all the things, after such further inquiry, if any, as it may consider necessary, may without prejudications to any other penalties or to which the employers may be liable under this act. It is what considered necessary, what may other perceived and other penalties would be there. Now, power of a government. In the power terms of the government, yes, it is of the few powers, जिसमें सबसे पहले है the power to grant exemptions and expectations, power to add the scheduled, power to giving the directions, power to make the rules, power to make the regulations. And another is general remark. General remark is what this act recognizes that in a country like India, where there is so much surplus labor, both educated and uneducated, wages cannot be allowed to determining by the force of a demand and supply along. In terms of India जैसी कंपनी जो कि डेवलपिंग में है, बहुत ज़्यादा हाई लेबर है वहाँ पर. It could be laborers in the very high number and that number could be the higher, or we can say that skills or अनस्किल्ड, एजुकेटेड और अनएजुकेटेड. सो इस केस में इसकी कैलकुलेशन सिर्फ डिमांड एंड सप्लाई से ही नहीं हो सकती. वी हैव टू कंसीडर द अदर ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ प्रिवेलिंग एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ लेबर ऑल्सो. And yes, that is why the main objective is to preventing the exploitation of labor. हमें इसमें एक exploitation of labor जैसे concept को भी रोकने के लिए ये पूरा act create किया है. And the implementation of act is also improve the level of wages both in organized and unorganized sector. So अगर हम लोग इसको follow करने पर एक steps लेते हैं तो वो steps जो है वो सारे issues को consider करता है and yes, trying to improve it. Then yes, it is suffer from the following limitation. The act is applicable only to the employment mentioned in the schedule to the act. जो भी scheduled में mentioned है सिर्फ वहाँ apply होता है. Then another is the act does not lay down principles and criteria for determining minimum wages. This is what that act does not lay down. Act जो है वो किसी तरीके का principles में काम नहीं कर रहा है. But yes, at the same time, it is working on to bringing out the minimum wages. And the act does not define the term minimum wages in the contest. So this is also another limitation. So yes, there are a few questions which you have to do it yourself. The first is explain briefly the power which government can exercise under the Minimum Wages Act. Another is explain the objective of Minimum Wages Act. So yes, this is all about for the today's session. We are winding up here. Thank you so much. Happy learning. We learn.